Hey everybody, welcome to our collab cast with Sam and Pete. This is the first one that we are doing for the month of November, so we're excited to have you here. We have a great lineup today. We're actually going to be talking to our colleagues that are presenting from Microsoft Consulting Services. So in particular, today we're going to talk about how they use M365 Insights to promote well-being, resilience, and transformation. And I know that especially during these times, this is something that our healthcare customers have been super focused on. So we're excited to introduce you to them today. So these are our presenters. We have Jesse Howard on. He is the Director for Cloud Productivity within Microsoft Consulting Services. And then we also have his teammate, John Allen, and he's the National Solution Sales Director for Health and Life Sciences. So don't worry, you don't have to memorize any of this. As always, we'll have the recording and all of their information for you to reach out to them or us on the HLS blog afterwards. So we'll get into some of those logistics. This is brought to you by the Microsoft Healthcare and Life Sciences Group. So as always, afterwards, by the end of the day today, I'll post the recording and any resources at aka.ms/HLS blog. aka.ms/HLS blog. And if you have not used Teams live events before, we definitely want to make sure that we answer your questions. We like to keep this super casual. We're here for you today. We're here for the hour to make sure that your questions are answered. So don't hesitate to reach out. Let us know where you're coming in from. We have people from all over the world. I'm personally based in Manhattan, but like I said, people coming in from all over, so we'd love to get to know you. Feel free to ask questions. Pete and I are Teams technical specialists within healthcare and life sciences, and we're going to be monitoring the chat the entire time. So we'll show you where to go in and view the chat, but maybe we'll respond to you privately. We might publish it. We might just stop the presenters if it's something that's super relevant to what they're presenting currently. And as always, this is going to be on our blog afterwards, aka.ms/HLS blog. So if you haven't used Teams live events before, up on the upper right-hand corner, there's a Q&A. If you just click on that little icon, then you will get this screen. You can add in your name if you want. Like I said, we love to get to know you, but feel free to ask a question, share a comment, whatever you want. We want to keep this super engaging and make sure that you get the most out of this hour today with MCS. So with that, we will go on to the presentation, and I believe Jesse is up first. So Jesse, you can go ahead and get your screen shared there, and we will transition over.
Thank you. Perfect. Hey, I'll actually kick us off first. I'm John Allen with Consulting Services. Just if you want to kick off to the next slide, I'll just dive right into the presentation. So I think you all are pretty familiar with this, the new normal, the term that we continuously use, but every business faces disruption and unforeseen challenges. So it's been, whether it's been a new competitor, broken supply chain, the gig economy, or AI and automation, that need to pivot and adapt has always been, part of the equation of being a successful organization. I think that really holds true if you've seen presentations in the past talking about the fourth industrial revolution and where organizations have sat for the last 30 years in the top 10 of the Fortune 500 organizations have dramatically changed over those years. And then 2020 came. So this unprecedented global shift to remote work ushered in this new norms of ways of working, whether it's been virtually every company in the world scrambled to make these near-term adjustments. And so planning for the return to the workplace and reimagining the business has really been top of the mind of the business leaders that we talk to day in and day out, and will be for impact for the years to come. This has really given us that need to adapt into these uncertain times, and it's really just been never more important than it has been before over these last years, these 9 months that we've been in through this pandemic. You go to the next slide, Jesse. So we hear from the customers we speak to, and the most thing that I've learned is how everyone's surprised at how well they've been able to respond to this crisis. And that shows in this recent Glint report that 82% of the managers expect to have more flexible work from home policies going forward. So that puts a needed pressure on the companies to establish these processes, the tools, and then the behaviors within the organizations to make those work from home policies successful. But I also hear, talking to the business leaders, that they know that their people and customers have been impacted, but they don't know by how much or how they've actually been impacted. So that's where it gets interesting when we start looking at the data, that you see that one of the biggest risk factors is employee burnout. And so in that same Glint survey that responded to the 82% wanted new updated work from home policies, you also see that 59% of those survey respondents had an increase of burnout throughout these past 9 months. And that showcases throughout the data that we'll share on the next couple of slides, but things like 200% increases in chat meetings on Saturdays and Sundays, or 52% increases in the evening hours of working. What's alarming for me is the situation gets worse when you look at the manager populations of the data sets. And that's because managers have this undue burden of figuring out how to lead these virtual teams and build this social capital within their teams. And that cohesion that you want from these organizations without that benefit of those informal coffee chats, the lunch hours, or even just the casual hallway conversations that you're able to have and build a cohesive group with you. So the workload's increasing with the managers, and then you'll see with the recent Qualtrics report that 40% of the managers and leaders that took this survey had a decrease in their mental health, which is even more alarming when you think about that the leaders within these organizations are the people that we want to navigate this process with the pandemic and these virtual scenarios through this crisis. So go to the next slide, Jesse. So the next couple of slides I'll walk you through was Microsoft's personal findings. We took the global disruption that's created actually kind of a novel opportunity for Microsoft to learn of how our workplace adapted, and in turn how we can help our customers respond and recover from this new norm that we've talked about, this disruption. We used a product called Workplace Analytics to measure and learn how the sudden 100% shift to remote work has changed the well-being of our employees, the collaboration, the networks they have, any of the behaviors and the effectiveness of our managers, and then even more importantly, what the relationships and how they've changed with the customers and suppliers and partners that support Microsoft. So we showcased a couple of these findings with the teams. We'll share the deck out afterwards, as Samantha mentioned, and you'll have all the links to the blogs. But we have our in-home and work blog where we share the real-time insights and learnings and findings, and as well as the actions that we were taking to respond and recover from the crisis, and how we're going to reimagine the future post-pandemic and working 100% from home. And you'll see two really recurring themes from the case studies that we'll pull out here. One is working from home, is getting longer, the days are getting longer, and then the increasing the burden with the managers as well. And so if you like Blinksys or Cliff Notes, I'll walk through the next two slides, just kind of the surface of the findings that give you those additional benefits of what the data is supporting. And then you can always click on the links further to dive into more of the details of what those findings look like. So go to the next slide. Perfect. This case study is really interesting. So we looked at the collaboration patterns among our sales team, and investigated how meetings and the reliance of the tools shifted, and dug into the importance really of the socialization at work. And so some of the findings that came out in this case study was the meetings times jumped across all roles, up 10%. The nature of the meetings changed, which was fascinating. So shorter meetings took more precedent, went up 22%. So meetings that were 30 minutes or less. And then there was a decrease in the longer meetings, so meetings that were an hour or longer. We also saw that there was an 18% increase to fill that gap of the casual hallway conversations or coffee time. So there was a lot more scheduled one-on-ones to fill up that socialization that we're missing at being in person at work. And then probably most fascinating to me was that the instant messaging just skyrocketed, 72% increase. Particularly notable among managers who saw the greatest increase. It was around 115% for instant messages. And then on the next case study that I thought that you all would find interesting was, and fairly relatable, is how we're balancing the work and life all under one roof, where you don't have this absence of a commute time from going to work. So working from home is getting longer. I know after hours collaborations is increased, and we were really able to validate that through the data sets that's probably shared amongst all of you on this call, about the days are getting longer, and then that there's been this clear shift in shifting the hours that we work throughout the day. So specifically what I mean by that is, we typically saw the majority of the meetings from 8 to 11. Those meetings have shifted majority through the 3 to 6 p.m. window. And then that the evening collaboration, mostly in the form of instant messaging, has increased. And then for weekend collaboration, so we're talking about the employee burnout, particularly among managers, has increased. And the subset of the data that you'll see in this case study that was fascinating was that of this 10% of the population that we metriced at Microsoft that had very low weekend collaboration, we saw that their weekend collaboration tripled within that span of a month time. So these two case studies that you can see deeper dive if you click on the links. And there's also through that AI blog on that first slide that we showcased that you can click on and read about how the actionable insights occurred throughout these case studies and what Microsoft did with all these findings. But now I'll transfer over to Jesse, who's going to walk us through how we took these insights and made them actionable through the product and the technologies at Microsoft.
Yeah, thanks, John. So without elaborating too much on this, obviously every business depends on its people to bring their best to work, and people are in many cases a competitive advantage, right? How you show up and how productive you are really drives top and bottom line results. And as we think about disruption, organizational resilience, as we call it, is really the thing that is going to enable businesses to adapt and evolve through that disruption. And John was talking a lot about some of the statistics we've generated over the past 6-8 months around Microsoft and what that looks like to us. But really, the way to think about resilience is through the lens of individual employees, who are obviously sort of the backbone of every business, but thinking about their well-being and how they are able to bring their best to work, how people are engaged and empowered so that they can show up and be productive in an environment that's stressful, changing, and challenging. The next sort of lens that we put on this is really about teams and organizations. How connected are they? And John talked a little bit about the stressors on managers, but really thinking about that magnified through all the layers of an organization, both in terms of management as well as different functional units or business units. You need to make sure that people are able to stay connected and able to work effectively with each other. And that's part of the fabric that makes up the resilience of an organization. And sort of the third lens that we put on here is about how we show up externally, right? So when you're thinking about your customers or your suppliers, the stakeholders you have outside of the organization, obviously showing up well and being able to be consistent predictable, and add value or expect consistent results. These are critical factors in sort of being able to manage through disruption. And so when we think about organizational resilience, we really want to think about these three different pillars or lenses, and how we can monitor and measure what behaviors and what work patterns are impacting and influencing these. So obviously, we talked about this already, but I wanted to come back to kind of a key note here, which is that when we shift suddenly work patterns, we have to start questioning some of the assumptions and some of the tacit knowledge that we have about the way people work. And as John pointed out, there's some pretty startling data that shows up when we start measuring how people are actually working now versus how they were working previously. But really, it starts with being able to sort of challenge those basic assumptions we make about the workplace and say, hey, now that folks are working largely remotely, they've got a different way of working at home and with each other. How are their activities changing, and what patterns are evolving as people adapt to this? And from an employee perspective, their well-being and their ability to bring their best to work is really dependent on a comfort level, empowerment, and focus that they can bring to every day, despite the fact that maybe they're not in the office or they don't have a separation quite the way they had previously. From an organizational perspective, we want to look at how are people working with each other? Where are we seeing a drop off or attenuation of collaboration? Where are we seeing a drop off in terms of focus or orchestration between teams and larger organizations? And then thinking about more broadly about external stakeholders. How are we doing at maintaining those connections to our suppliers, our customers, the external folks that we partner with, to be able to be effective as an organization and as individuals? And I think just again, the important thing here is not the specific questions. It's really making sure that you're not going too far in making assumptions about the way people work, because a lot of those assumptions are going to be challenged, and a lot of the patterns for work that are evolving are going to reflect maybe new things that we're not familiar with or weren't evident when we had an office to go to. So we talked about sort of the three pillars of sort of the disruption: the respond, recover, and reimagine. And we want to try to walk through how we can equip leaders, managers, and individuals with the right insights to help them work through that evolution. And sort of as you can see, for a lot of folks, and particularly in the U.S., and particularly if you're in healthcare, this is like a tremendous disruption, sort of an ongoing challenge to just respond to the massive amount of flux that's taking place. But more broadly, most customers that we talk to have already done some degree of response in the form of they've given people access to tools and data remotely. They've solved for some of the challenges that are more technical in nature. But we're starting to see as this disruption progresses and the COVID thing continues, that the response element of this disruption is dragging out, and folks may not have recognized that response isn't just a technology problem to solve, it's also a behavioral and mental health problem to solve. And so really we want to make sure that people have the right insights to be able to assess the well-being of their employees, the connectivity of their organization, and how connected they are with their external stakeholders. But for many, many organizations, they're already in a recover mindset. That is, they're thinking about how they can adapt, and to use the phrase, the new normal, bring the new normal to life, right? And so they're sort of thinking, okay, how do I start to put together the programs, the tools, and the systems that enable the organization to support and promote employee well-being, adapt normal, quote unquote, normal office activities and behaviors to the work patterns and styles that are emerging, and then how do we start to rebuild or recover those external relationships that really are core to the business. And some of our customers are actually in this reimagine phase, where they're looking at this and thinking, okay, we've adapted to this new way of working largely. Now we want to think about how we can set ourselves up for success long term by taking some of those patterns and some of those insights and applying them in a thoroughgoing way to how we want to operate going forward. That is, people that are making the pivot from recovery to reimagine are the folks that are actively working on organizational resilience. They're building the fabric that's going to make the organization more capable of adapting to future challenges and really set themselves up to be more agile. And this is where you see a pivot from sort of an existential mindset to more of a transformative mindset. What can we do to make sure that going forward, we're much more capable of dealing with disruption? And that pays dividends in a lot of ways that aren't dependent upon recovering from the current crisis. So let's make this a little bit specific. So one of the case studies we have here, and I won't drain all the words, that you can follow along with those when you're catching up on this offline, but effectively, if you're looking at a scenario where you want to return people to the office and you recognize that maybe you've downsized your office space, and which was the case here, and you're really trying to figure out, okay, we have lower density in the office, we have to achieve distancing. We also maybe have a smaller footprint of office space. How are we going to determine who should come back? Or where would we get the most benefit from having people come back? And the important thing here is, using organizational data, using the way that, the tacit information that's available in people's calendars, chat, and meetings, you can start to look at who's working with whom. You can segment those populations into sort of this quadrant of collaboration where we look at cross-functional collaboration and intra-team collaboration and say, okay, who's working with whom, and how do we start to think about those populations as low collaboration, cross-functional, high collaboration, and maybe people who are within their team collaborating but not collaborating as much externally. And use that quadrant and that segmentation to identify where we would get the most benefit from having folks return in person to a space where ad hoc collaboration is a little bit easier. And the important thing to think about here is this isn't necessarily organizationally segmented, and it's not necessarily job function or role segmented. It's segmented based on behavior. And that's a different way of thinking about responding to that question, which is, how do we decide who comes back to work? Sort of another concrete example I would say is, look, we've got at Microsoft a lot of changes to the way that we engage our customers, and our sales managers are increasingly asked to carry a lot of the challenge, a lot of the burden around managing individual sellers through the challenges of virtual selling all the time. We also have obviously an increased challenge of connecting with our customers and ensuring that we're meeting their needs virtually. So what we want to try to do is figure out, well, how are we performing and what does good look like? And then what do we do about where we are now so we can be more effective going forward? And as you can see here, the data is a little bit startling. It definitely took some of our executives aback, which is our internal collaboration at the sales manager role is 80%. Only 20% of their time is really focused on customer work and customer engagement. And so the question then is, well, okay, what do we do about that? And we looked at how people are spending their time and looked at, well, how much time are they spending with rhythm of business, people, escalations, forecasting, normal sales management activities. And we said, okay, how do we start to redistribute that time or provide the guidance and tools that enable and empower sales managers to be more effective so that we can see an improvement in the efficiency of the time that they spend with customers, but also start to look at how we can pivot more of their time towards customer-facing engagement. And this is obviously for us an ongoing conversation at Microsoft, but in broad terms, starting with that measurement and looking at how that impacts the business connectivity is the basis for where we start on this. So want to pivot now and talk a little bit about how this works. So obviously I think there is a need for us to generate signals. So we look primarily with workplace analytics at what information is available in Office 365, in Microsoft 365 tools and apps, because that we have access to that via our platform, and it tells us how people are using their time and how they're communicating with each other. But we don't look at that from a individual perspective. We're aggregating that information up. So it's not an individual inspection. It's looking at patterns that emerge in the whole organization that we're interested in. There are controls and governance tools in place to ensure that privacy is protected, that we're meeting regulatory burdens, that we are, absolutely not thinking about this as sort of a big brother top-down view, but instead thinking about it in terms of how is the organization as a whole behaving, and how do we start to think about segmenting out specific pockets of behaviors that we can say, oh, that's really impacting us in a positive or negative way. Let's focus on that. In order to do that, we have to add business context. So we need to know from HR systems, et cetera, how are people tied back to the business by function, by organization, by standard title or role. There's lots of contextual information we want to pull in so we can make sense of the information we're getting about how they're spending their time. And then, all of this stuff is then synthesized to generate insights. And Microsoft has obviously invested heavily in research and science to be able to provide prepackaged insights and recommendations. But we also can extend this with customers using their own or third-party data science and social science expertise, right? So this isn't just a set of features that you turn on and the insights you get are the insights you get. Turn it on, you start to collect the information, you start to analyze it, and then you start to see how you can extend that.
Hey, Jesse, I think, oh, go ahead. I think this is a good place to pause for a second. We got a couple of questions in here. Well, we have one comment on someone saying, I can tell that my employees aren't as engaged now that they're working from home. I think you're going to get more into this, and I definitely have heard that from a lot of my customers. But I think we can review best practices, and if anyone has any questions specifically that relate to what might help your organization, we're here for you to talk through that today for sure. But I don't know, Jesse or John, if you want to comment on that, and then there's one other question in the chat too.
I'll come back on that specific one because we do have sort of an employee engagement dashboard with a set of insights that we look at. And when we started to look at this back in March and April, we had a lot of the same concerns, right? Obviously, big challenges in terms of folks suddenly working from home, and concerns that, how are people spending their time? What are they doing? How do we know they're being productive? And that evolved into a sort of a discussion and a bunch of research into, well, how do we know if people are engaged? Which is a slightly different question to ask. And what we found is that actually it's not universally true. There's not sort of a decline in engagement. What we see is that some people are actually much more engaged. About 20-some%, I think, in the target population we looked at early on in this was a group of folks who actually become more engaged and are more productive as a result of this. But a majority of folks do see either neutral or a decline in engagement. And we've got a set of insights in our prepackaged dashboards that drive this, but the bottom line is that segmentation was not found to be based on role or location. It was more based on people's work styles and, for lack of a better expression, their personality type. How are they positioned to work? And so I think if you're an organization that's looking at this and saying, hey, I can tell people are less engaged, start by trying to understand who is less engaged. Start by trying to think about where are those people in terms of their interactions with others in the business, their impact and role in the business, and start to think about, okay, what are some of the things that need to be true for them to feel more engaged and bring more to work? Is it communication and collaboration tools? Is it manager time? There's a whole host of things that we can recommend or that you can develop that are all about reaching out to those folks that are less engaged and making them a more closely knit part of the workforce.
Awesome. Thanks, Jesse. I love that recommendation on really breaking it down to the individual people themselves so that you get to the root of the problem. I think another good question we have in the chat here is, how do you recommend cutting down the amount of time we're spending on internal meetings?
So there's a whole raft of this. In fact, there's an HBR article that's linked to at the end of this deck, which you can go through in more detail. But there's a whole set of data points around layers of folks in meetings, who needs to be there, making sure that when leadership meetings happen, we're not including too many people that are 2 or 3 steps below the leaders in terms of the org chart, and really making sure that there are intentional communications to managers and individuals about, how to be intentional about scheduling meetings and inviting folks. The other thing is the My Analytics capability actually has recommendations inbuilt that sort of prompt you when you go to schedule something, say, hey, have you thought about this? Do you want to do this slightly differently? And so there are a couple different tools, but I think the bottom line, again, I would come back to is, there are certain things that are general guidance that you can apply to meeting culture. Being able to see where you need to put emphasis and focus on driving behavior change is sometimes more beneficial to you than trying to just shotgun out that general guidance. And so that's where a workplace analytics capability comes in that lets you look at your meeting culture and say, where are those pockets where we have an opportunity to drive real value by changing a little bit of behavior. And I'll share an anecdote that's not documented here, but when we first started working with workplace analytics a few years ago, we applied it to the engineering organization that was developing it, which is at the time was about 5,000 people. And they looked at meeting culture and discovered through that analysis and conversations with the management that they were using up the equivalent of 160 person full-time people every year on unnecessary cycles in just management meetings. And so they intentionally took their leadership team, said, hey, this is what we want to change in terms of who we invite to these meetings, how we schedule them, and how we cascade information through the organization, so we can free up engineering time to go focus on business problems and spend less time in meetings where people are just riding along. They're not actually actively participating. And so, I think it's really just about focusing on that active participation that yields the most value.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jesse. If anyone has any follow-ups to that, feel free to place them in the chat. But with that, it looks like it's a good transition to how workplace analytic works and gathering insights there.
Yeah, so I'll just plow forward because the last slide was really just me elaborating further on the technology here, which I can come back to if there's a question. But the first thing I would say is gathering insights is the first step. And obviously there's this blurb from Gartner, but obviously insights alone aren't going to yield the result. You have to couple those insights up with targeted actions that drive the outcomes you're looking for. And we think of this as kind of a virtuous cycle, right? And so this reference pattern, which I'll step through briefly, is really our attempt to encapsulate a new operating model for how people work. So it starts by capturing information, gathering signals and data. And we talked about workplace analytics as gathering things from Microsoft 365 apps, but you can also look at surveys and polls as other sources of that information and look at other data capture from devices like badge scans or other kinds of IoT that would help inform where people are working with each other, how they're working together, and how they feel about the work they're doing. That should feed into the performance modeling that you do. And we can provide benchmarks. There are also third-party benchmarks out there that can be applied to sort of say, hey, what do we think good looks like? How are we performing relative to that benchmark? And what do we think we should be doing about that? And that's all part of this sort of performance modeling process. The other thing that you will find as you go through this exercise is that you can identify who your change agents are. So who are the people who are most capable of influencing and driving the outcomes you want? Are people influencers of their peers? Are there people who are super collaborators that are touching a lot of people and are capable of driving significant change? So it's not just about what behaviors you might want to change and where to apply that, but it's also how to go about thinking about driving change. And then the key thing, and this is the thing I would stress more than anything else, is that we now have the ability, right, with this tooling and this process to instrument change. And what I mean by that is be able to say, we want to go drive change of behavior, change of systems or tools that we're using. And we want to be able to then either bake into the systems and tools that people use every day, the guidance to reinforce the behavior, or we want to reach out and in a targeted way, communicate and drive change with individuals through typical, people and process change management. And we want to maybe empower managers to take ownership of the change we want to see and give them the tools and the insights to be able to much more effectively be accountable for the changes that are occurring within their organizations. And so all of these things then feed back into the analysis process that ties back to the performance measurement. And this continuous cycle is iterative, right? We don't expect people to get it right the first time or be at scale the first iteration. The intent here is to build a muscle and bake this into the way that we work. We want to make sure that when we think about analysis and planning, we're going deep in the data. We're really being inquisitive and curious to try to understand all of the context. It's not just enough to know that organization A isn't talking to organization B, and that's creating a problem for us. Why aren't they communicating? Is it a cultural issue, or is it a tooling issue? What's the crux of the issue is really an important influencer. And so to understand that, you have to go deep. Then it's building the operational muscle to make it part of the way you operate, whether it's a centralized mechanism to do the analysis and change management, et cetera, that drives the changes you want to see, or whether it's democratizing and empowering individuals and managers to take action themselves. It's about making sure that there's the infrastructure and the operational muscle to exercise that drives that continuously. And then it's about scale, right? So again, thinking about this as understanding deeply, making it part of the way that you operate, and then thinking about applying that at scale and being able to do that continuously as new challenges come up. All this kind of approach is what drives resilience. From an MCS perspective, Microsoft Consulting Services perspective, we have done a lot of this kind of work, and we try to encapsulate this, and I included this so people could see sort of a time scale, right? We're not talking about a year or 2 years to implement something. You can do an iteration, you can do the analysis, planning, benchmarking, performance measurement, change management, and feedback loop in about a quarter. So you can start to instrument the changes you want to see in the business and see the impact of your efforts within about a quarter. And that's a really important thing to think about when you are basically thinking, okay, how am I going to see changes in a time of disruption? So not needing to spend 6 months or a year, but being able to relatively rapidly look at the data, understand what a first step might be, make some changes, and then see that flow through the organization. You can do fairly rapidly. And these are variable durations, but this is a typical sort of time scale. Sort of why would, what's one of the things that we hear from customers is, okay, I get that this is valuable, but how does this actually drive real cost benefit? And so I put this case study in here just to sort of say, hey, this is one instance, right? I mentioned previously the Microsoft experience with the engineering organization, looking at 160 full-time headcount equivalent of time as a savings. But here's a smaller scale example that, a single meeting instance, right? 70 plus business days and 170 hours of preparation for one meeting that happens every month. That's a huge investment for one meeting. Being able to target which people are spending that time and why it's taking them so long, and then be able to reduce the time investment substantially, and more importantly, the preparation time to 8 business days, increases the agility of that business tremendously, frees up time and focus to go tackle other problems, and it yields bottom line savings. And so this is the kind of thing that, if you've got the right fabric in place, if you've got the right operational muscle, you can do over and over and over again, because every organization has lots of opportunities to do this kind of thing. So again, I just want to kind of tie it all together and say, when we think about how to create organizational resilience and we think about how to apply that to disruption, we want to make sure that we're thinking through the insights, the operational aspects, and driving changes in behavior, and focusing on sort of 3 buckets. But for most of our customers, right, external collaboration is a key focus area. We want to make sure that we're looking at who is engaged with our customers and suppliers, how they are working and how we can get them the tools and the support they need to be much more effective in engaging those external folks. And really, things like supply chain coverage or network patterns are really applicable to the healthcare space, but I'm sure there are many, many other examples. Obviously, internal collaboration is huge. We need to make sure that knowledge is being shared effectively and that different parts of the organization are orchestrating the way they work and identifying places where collaboration is siloed or blocked because of either infrastructural or cultural challenges is really key. And then if you think about optimizing process and really being able to focus on care and the outcomes you want to provide, being able to say, hey, how do I bring folks together more effectively? How do I drive the right culture, the right behaviors, and implement the right systems so that I can get that cross-group collaboration and orchestration? That's really, sort of one element of this resiliency story. And then I think the last thing, of course, is for us is coaching and onboarding, right? The more we can nurture talent, the more we can reduce the time it takes for people to become effective in their roles, but then also promote that sense of empowerment and engagement, the more we'll see productivity and the more we'll see retention, right? We talked at the beginning about burnout. Preventing burnout is as much a function of providing some nurturing in the coaching side of things and providing that sense of empowerment as it is just sort of reducing the workload. And so really we want to make sure that we have the ability to look for pockets where perhaps some reinforcement or some additional focus to ensure that we're doing that coaching and nurturing really is going to yield results. And so with that, I will pause and say, we have obviously a lot of academic literature that's published under HBR on this. John shared some links to the blog up above. We really want to make sure that folks are thinking through how they can, take our investment in science and turn it into action themselves. And so if you don't have your own data science team or social sciences PhDs that can help you, create models and benchmarks, we've done a lot of that work, we've invested, and we want to make sure that we share that with our customers. So with that, I think that's my canned work. I'm happy to take questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Jesse. I think a lot of the attendees on the call today, and John, feel free to jump in too, are from specifically our health and life sciences background. So maybe to kick off the Q&A here, any examples that you want to share specifically on the healthcare side, anything you want to highlight so that they can kind of see themselves using your solutions?
I guess I would start with one example from life sciences, and that was a large pharma company that looked at how they were doing development, how they were doing knowledge sharing, and looked at the culture they had for innovation and bringing new products into that pipeline, and realized that they have sort of massive duplication of effort across different parts of their organization and relatively low maturity at learning from and sharing best practices. And so, through this process of analysis, they sort of uncovered not only that those were issues, but more specifically where those issues were occurring and which leaders and which change agents were needed to start to tackle that. And then through a process of iterative application, they sort of said, okay, how are we going to make sure that we understand why this is occurring? How do we, again, the folks you're dealing with here are highly skilled, highly trained, in many cases, PhD research type people. How do we start to reach them and drive some behavior changes that will give us the increased transparency, the increased knowledge sharing that we're looking for? And, that's been ongoing now for about 1.5 years. And they've really been able to see increase in the velocity of development of their products, as well as an increase in the kind of cross-pollination of ideas that I think, they're maybe more difficult to pin down the tangible result, but definitely culturally what they were after. And I think, that's an example where you can start to look at that pattern and say, how true is that in my space? It's true, I think, in most businesses. where you have a large, complex organization, people tend to be experts in their fields and experts in their areas, but that expertise isn't necessarily leveraged or shared. So we want to make sure that we are, getting that expertise visible, making sure it's shared, and a lot of times that comes down to not so much, things like, knowledge management systems and other things, but it also comes down to just being able to figure out who those people are and share who they are with their management, and that can be a catalyst for change.
Awesome. So we did get a question in the Q&A panel. So when it comes to changing culture, do you recommend starting with grassroots or from more of a top-down approach?
Well, I think the literature would say leadership matters in changing culture. I think, obviously, simply taking a top-down hammer approach to driving culture change isn't effective. But if you look at a lot of the published literature, and if you look at how Microsoft has done it and was encapsulated in some of the things that we've published, it's a comprehensive approach. First of all, you need leadership buy-in. They need to share a vision of what culture looks like and what those principles are that are going to be core to the identity and the culture they're trying to form. And if the leaders are bought into that, you can start to build a programmatic approach to driving that throughout the organization. And you can, again, start to think about, okay, who are the change agents? What is my strategy based on the way that this company is organized and how we work? And you can start to get very tactical about saying, okay, how am I going to drive the right messaging, the right leadership, the right transparency to really affect the culture change I'm trying to achieve? And by the way, I mean, we use this at Microsoft to drive culture change, and there has been a significant shift over the last 5 years, right? And it started at the top, but it's not exclusively folks at the top. I would say, just both anecdotally and in a measurable way, we can demonstrate how this has taken root at the individual contributor level, at the root employee level, and it really has changed the way people work. So I would say, to sum it up, grassroots only isn't going to be effective. Leadership only isn't going to be effective, but it starts with the leaders sharing that vision and then looking at how we can best cascade that through the organization to reach people at the bottom. Yep.
Yeah, and just to add to that, what Jesse said, it really starts with a hypothesis and then using workplace analytics at that cumulative organizational lever to create the dashboards and drive the data to either confirm your hypothesis of the changes in the workplace environment, and then leveraging my analytics, which is the more that personal data set and individual decision making and suggestions that I'll call them that the employee would get on a weekly email to make different suggestions in their behavior. So those products work in combination of that grassroots and then the top-down organizational structure that Jesse's talking about. It's a great blend between both of them.
And just to add one thing to that, John, I would say it's not really very effective for anybody in a leadership position in a company to say to their managers or their employees, you're now accountable for X, Y, or Z change in your behavior or in the culture, without providing them the tools to do that change effectively and the tools to see whether or not that change is taking effect, right? And so to that point about dashboards and cockpits and my analytics, we have a variety of tools available to ensure that people have not only the message on what needs to change, but also the tools to individually see whether or not those changes are occurring. And it's really about empowering people to take ownership of the change that really unlocks the culture change.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And one more is, how do we get in touch with you after this? So good question. We actually we're going to post out everything from the slides to any links to resources. That will all be on our blog afterwards at aka.ms/HLS blog. But then we'll also add in our LinkedIns. So you can absolutely get in touch with us personally. We Also, obviously, highly recommend reaching out to your Microsoft account team since they have the context and will be able to direct you to the appropriate resource as well. But we're here as a Microsoft team and we're here for you. So I don't know if there's anything that you want to add, Jesse and John, about how to get started with us, but would love to hear it.
Yeah, I guess I can take that one. I would say the easiest place is to start with your Microsoft account teams. If you have trouble getting a hold of your Microsoft account teams, Jesse, Sam mentioned that we share our LinkedIn profiles, and you can reach out to us directly, and we'll make sure that you get in contact with either us or the appropriate person at Microsoft.
Awesome. All right, so I'll give it a couple more, maybe like 30 seconds or so for the Q&A. Feel free to add any last minute questions. But we really, really appreciate you, Jesse and John, joining the call today. I know Pete and I always talk about how we like to show our customers what we can do with the Microsoft solutions. And then the next question is always, how do we actually make this happen for our organization? And we're excited to have you today to show off that solution set and then also kind of get the conversation started for a lot of our healthcare customers. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for the opportunity. I'm very passionate about this, so love to hear more from anyone about their challenges. This is great.
Awesome. All right, so I think we are good here, just coming up on the hour, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Again, all of this will be posted out afterwards at aka.ms/HLS blog.